Have you ever wondered what the benefits of podcast guesting might be? In this episode, we are talking about how podcast guesting can support your business goals. You'll learn why being a podcast guest is so valuable, the importance of having a podcast guesting strategy, and how you can find podcasts to guest on. And stick around right to the end so you can learn how to get the most value out of your podcast guest appearances. Welcome to Architecture Business Club, the show that helps you build a better business in architecture so you can enjoy more freedom, flexibility, and fulfillment in what you do. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss another episode. We're joined by Nathalie Doremieux, a membership and tech strategist with over 10 years experience helping coaches and course creators design high retention programs that drive real results. In 2025, she co-created Podcast Lead Flow, a tool that turns podcast episodes into high quality lead magnets using smart automations and AI. Natalie's work blends strategy, tech, and a human first approach with a dash of French flair. Head to podcastleadflow.com/Jon, where you'll find a tool to help you take the next step after listening to this episode. We're going to be talking about podcast guesting, and specifically how podcast guesting can support your business goals. So I think a good place to start is, why be a podcast guest in the first place? Like, why be a podcast guest?
Well, first, I think that podcasting in general, right? Just because we get to hear people's voice, right? And sometimes now more and more seeing them, on YouTube through videos, it's so much easier to connect and convey really what we want to say, but also like who we are. I think it's an accelerator compared to reading something, right? So just podcasting in general is a great way to build that relationship quicker, I think, with your audience. Now, why being a guest is a great strategy is because you don't have to manage your podcast, right? And manage all of these things. You can just show up. Now, it's a great strategy when you are strategic about how you choose the podcast you want to be on, right? So that's why we'll talk about strategy. But it's just a great way to get some visibility, in front of people that don't know you yet, right? Where you get to really express your expertise, but also where people can feel your values, your mission, right? Which is all that basically helps connect with people and build that trust.
And building trust is so important, really. I mean, it's fundamental, isn't it? And as you say, podcasting and podcast guesting is just a great way to do that. That when you hear somebody's voice or you get to see them on a video, it does help to build trust so much quicker than them just reading something, like just reading your about page on your website, perhaps. So yeah, absolutely, completely agree with you there on that. Yeah, it's a fantastic way to build trust. I think as well, there was, I think I mentioned this in a recent episode already, but there was this quote from, I think it was Bob Berg, that like all things being equal, people will choose to do business with people that they know, like, and trust. And yeah, podcasting is just one of the best ways to build that trust with people, for sure.
Absolutely.
Cool. Okay, so there's definitely some compelling reasons there. And particularly in relation to business, that trust building is very important. So, definitely there's some great reasons to be a podcast guest. But you mentioned there about strategy as well. Yeah. So I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on why it's so important to have a strategy. Is it not just good enough just to turn up and talk on any podcast about anything? Why do we need a strategy for this?
Yeah. Well, I guess you need a strategy if you have a purpose, if you have a specific goal for why you're podcasting, why you're podcast guesting, right? If you just go on podcasts because you just love to talk, then you can basically go on any podcast, right? But if you have a specific goal, like wanting to connect with your ideal audience who might be interested to work with you in the future, then you need a strategy, right? To figure out who are these podcasts that I want to try to be on, right? But also, what do these people need to hear from me in the episode? Like you were saying, we have to build trust. So it's not going to be buy my stuff, work with me. Here is my program. Here is a link for you to sign up, right? We are connecting with people through podcasting. We are not selling. The selling happens later on, in the nurturing, right? So it's really focusing on what is just that next step. And that's where the strategy comes in. And then you can come up with a plan of action. Like, then what do I need to do? But like coming up with a plan, if you don't have a strategy, basically you're really not likely to get the results, that you're looking for.
Okay. So it's joining the dots between what are your objectives, and if this is a business goal or it is forming part of your business strategy, joining the dots between that and then where and how you need to be showing up on podcasts. So, absolutely you could go, if you like to talk, you could go and talk on all sorts of podcasts about all sorts of different things. But even though that advantage you mentioned about podcast guesting, you don't have the investment of time and money in setting up and running and producing and publishing the show, but you do still have to invest time in showing up. You do still have to take part in those sessions, and most small business owners are time poor these days. A lot of people are very busy, so it makes sense, doesn't it, then to have a strategy to make sure that there's that alignment between showing up, why you're showing up, what you're talking about, and the alignment with your business goals. Could we dig into that a bit more then? I'd be interested to know what things we should consider specifically when it comes to podcast guest strategy before we start applying to be a guest on podcasts. What are some of the things that we might want to be thinking about as part of that strategy work?
So like I was mentioning, you want to get clear on why are you podcast guesting? Are you podcast guesting for visibility? Like, do you want to be seen? Are you looking for partners? So you want to be seen as an expert, as an authority. If that is the case, you want to go and be interviewed in those podcasts where they are already interviewing people at that level, because you want to be seen, in that circle, right? On the contrary, if you're podcasting with like a specific like business purpose, like building an audience, building your list, right? Then you might consider, reaching out to podcasts that talk about the expertise that you have, but maybe where you're complementary, right? Because there could be also opportunities, for partnerships. So, and there can be more than one reason, more than one goal, right? But for every goal, like I said earlier, it's about being strategic about what do I need to make sure I talk about? Like, what would make people think, oh, she knows her stuff, right? It sounds like these are our values, which again, with podcasting, we can feel the emotion so much more than in writing, right? Sometimes I read something and I don't know if the person is angry or excited. You're not exactly sure. Here we can tell. We can see when people are funny. We can see when people, sometimes trip on their words, or if everything is like you're basically reading from a script, or you're okay to go free flow. And I think those are all things that help us get to know people. So you want to, I call it like do your homework. It's like figure out what is that ideal audience? What do they need to see from you? What kind of level of energy you need to show up with, right? Because it's contagious with the host, with the listener, right? That will make the right person say, with that person, I need to start following her. I'm going to go and follow our next step and see where that leads me.
Okay. So part of this is understanding who is it? Like, who is the person, the audience that you want to get in front of? And then thinking about another part of this you mentioned is, what is it? Like, what is the thing that they need to hear? How do you want to make them feel when they hear your voice and when they see you, if it's a video-based show? So yeah, thinking that can help inform the content then. So who is it that we're trying to appeal to? And what is it? What are the stories or the things that we want them to hear from us? Like, how do we want them to feel when they hear us or see us? You know, what are the things that would make sense to share with them? That's really good. Yeah. And then I guess then it's thinking that if you've identified the audience and you thought about the message and the stories, the things that you're going to share, then it's thinking about, so which podcasts already have this audience? So now, you know, where do I go? Like, which podcast should I apply to speak on? Because there's an alignment between the audience that I want to get in front of and the message that I have to share.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a bit of work, but I think it's quality over quantity. So if you've never been a guest before and you want to try it out, there are podcasts that are looking for guests. You can be a guest on a podcast like this. Do they have your audience? No. But it could be a way for you to test the water and see how it feels, right? If you don't want to, go on the big ones, like right away. But another big element, which is something you did really, really well, Jon, by the way, is the connection you make with the host. There are several things that you did that I'll mention that are really, really important. The first one is that we connected before. So, we've met before in was it Manchester? I can't remember.
I think it was in Newcastle.
In Newcastle, right? So we knew each other, but we had a call to connect. We had a call to talk about what value do we want to bring to these people, okay? Then we came up with questions. And those questions, remember when I said the bullet point, what do I want people to hear? This is exactly what we are doing right now in this episode, right? And so it's important to have that connection. Another thing that you did is you press record 4 minutes before we started. That means that we were in the flow, right? And then at some point you say, okay, now we're going to do a silence and we're going to get started. And that puts me in a much more comfortable position than when somebody say, okay, ready, I'm going to press record. And then you're like making this face and you're like, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying it's those little things that you did that really help people, feel really comfortable. And we can tell that you've been doing this for a while and you want people to be at ease, right? But we worked on this, right? We worked on the questions and what we were how we're going to deliver value in this amount of time. So I think there is work that needs to be done. It's not a send an email, that one sounds good. Can I be a guest? Yes, no, right? Because people get so many requests. The ones that are going to stand out are really the ones that really come from somebody that's genuinely interested in bringing value. And for that means they have listened to some episodes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I receive a lot of pitches from prospective guest speakers for this show. And to be quite honest, many of them are not very good. Occasionally there's something that comes through that really does stand out, and you can tell like straight away that there's just that little bit of effort. And I'm not even saying it takes too much effort, like just the fact that somebody genuinely seems like a good fit for the show that they're applying for, and that they appear to have gone to the effort to, at the very least, have listened to the trailer or maybe checked out an episode or two. And that you can tell very, very quickly if somebody is just spamming tons of shows, or they're using like ChatGPT to write the email, it's quite common as well. Because a lot of business owners recognize how valuable podcast guesting is. There are many people that invest, rather than investing in their own show, they invest in agencies they'll pay an agency to help them find guest opportunities.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And again, they do vary in quality. I've had many that aren't very good, but occasionally I get a really, really good pitch through an agency. It's not often, but I always feed that back to them, that when I then have the conversation with the guest, I say, you found a really good person to work with there that's securing these interviews, because, you know, that pitch that came through was like 10 out of 10 compared to most of the others that aren't so good, really. But yeah, I mean, that's something we should probably talk about next, really, isn't it? That I think how we find podcaster guests on. I mean, I've mentioned one way there where you pay a chunk of money to somebody else to do the work to find it for you. But if you don't have the budget to do that, how else can we go about finding what shows to guest on?
Like many things in business, tapping into your network and who you know, just to ask. Because these people, remember, they already know you. And they're like, hey, I'm looking for podcasts. What are you guys listening to? I'm looking for podcasts that have this type of audience where I can talk about this, you know, and they kind of know usually what your expertise is and what you're about, right? So that's the first step, is really to really ask, you know, around. You also want to be curious and you want to do your own research. There is nothing wrong with using ChatGPT for that. Okay, actually even Claude, which is better for research, right? To get you a list of podcasts and that you can start to go and listen to. You can, you know, if you have groups, if you have a community, then you can also post, you know, on social media and ask people, you know, like, what is a good podcast around this or that you enjoy listening to, right? It takes a bit of, you know, homework, you know, definitely. Another thing you can do, which is something that I have done, is to, when you know someone in your area of expertise and you know they're getting interviewed on podcast, look for them, you know, do a search and find out what podcast they guested on and see if it makes sense. You know, say, you know, I can come in with a different approach, right? You can listen to the episode and say, you know, like, I know this was the angle, you know, I'm more like this way. And like, is that something you feel your audience might be interested in? So it's about like being strategic, you know, with who you know, whether they are your peers, your competitors, but also your network, you know, and just, you know, tapping into, you know, all that knowledge.
Yeah, I like that you've mentioned that first, that looking at your own network, as you say, that most of us will have a network of some kind. You know, we'll have, it might vary in size depending on who you are. But that is a great place to start, because you might already have people that you're connected with that are podcast hosts that have their own show.
Yeah.
And so that's a great place to start if you're already connected. You also mentioned that you might have connections there that maybe they've guested on another show. That could be a good way to get potentially an introduction, because if they have then, they're a past guest of that show, that might be a way to get an introduction made, to get a foot in the door with that host. So I think that would be another good way to do it. And as you say, the other thing you mentioned, research. So you can you mentioned ChatGPT, Claude. Absolutely, those tools are great for research, or even just opening your podcast app on your phone. Like there are, there's also kind of paid for platforms that you can use to research podcasts. But if you're trying to do things free or on a budget, then just opening up like Apple Podcasts or Spotify and type in a few keywords and search terms related to the types of topics that you want to talk about. And that could be a good way to just discover a few shows.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's definitely a few options there for people. So when it comes to what to talk about, so if we find some shows and we've already thought a little bit about the strategy, that may give us some ideas and thoughts about the type of things we should be sharing. But do you have any suggestions for the types of things that we could talk about? You know, and I appreciate that this is, I would say, keeping our audience in mind, that we have a lot of people listening that are from an architecture background. So, architects, architecture technologists, interior designers, so people that are in around the world of design and property. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts for them on any ideas for what they could talk about?
Yeah. So I think again, thinking with the end in mind, right? Thinking of what do I know? What do I believe in? Right? What story can I share that will make my ideal client or partner want to know more about me and connect, right? So it's not necessarily expertise, a tip. It's not necessarily that, but it's maybe your way of working, right? I think one way to look at this, for this to be generic and work with anyone is pick 2-3 ideal clients or partners that you have, right? How did you connect? What made them think, "Ooh, I like this person, let's connect"? Is it a story about how you started the business? Is it a specific way you're working with people? Do you have a method, a system, right? Is it because you're very funny? I don't know. Is there something that when people talk about you, what do they say? And that's what you want to have people feel in the episode. It's not when people don't know you, and that's a mistake that a lot of people make in podcasting, and I have made it, is that they don't know me. I want them to see me as the expert. Therefore, I'm going to be here is all that I know. That is feeding our ego. Like, oh, look at all that I know. But these people, they haven't connected yet. So to them, it's like, okay, she knows all this stuff, but what is that doing to me? People are going to do business with people at the end, always, right? So it's that trust and that connection.
That's really interesting, actually, that you mention about maybe a preconception, like a preconceived idea that we have to show up as an expert. Like if we're going on a podcast and if I'm going to go on this video interview show or this podcast and I'm going to talk, I have to be this like expert. And a lot of people are quite uncomfortable with that label. I know that there are some people that are maybe some out there that have a bigger ego that are absolutely fine with people calling them an expert or thinking them that way. But there are a lot of people that are uncomfortable with that. And also, I think as well that there are a lot of people that they may question what they have to offer in terms of like what to talk about, because I think that when you're so close to what you do, you can end up, you take it for granted that it's just like, well, who's going to be interested in this? Like this thing that I do, like who's going to be interested in this? So I think that's another myth, that people love to see behind the curtain. They love to see and learn about, somebody that's not worked with an architect before, they would be fascinated to understand more. Most people would be interested in that, in learning more about a career that they, don't know much about, So I think there is an opportunity there. And you also mentioned there about ways of working. You mentioned that was something worth mentioning. And again, I would challenge a myth that I think a lot of people will have in their mind of, well, I just do the same as any other architect or any other interior designer. That is not true. You might follow a rough approximation of the same route on a project. It'll go through similar work stages, but your individual way of working, like how you work and like, you as a person, like that's going to be so unique. Like your personality, your approach, the way that you deal with people, the way that you communicate, like all of those things will give the customer a different experience if and when they do decide to work with you. That's going to be completely different experience for them than working with the architects down the road. So there is absolutely stuff that you can share. Like anybody that's listening to this episode now, there will be unique things that they can share. And I think also you mentioned like stories.
Stories and why we do things. why we do things. You know, people buy why we do things more than the thing itself, right? And especially when at the beginning of the relationship, when we are connecting and learning about the person, this is what gets people curious about wanting to learn more.
That's such a good point, because I think from a customer's point of view, that there's almost going to be like this expectation that, well, anybody that has got this certain level of qualification and experience and professionalism, like there could be a variety of companies that are all can offer a similar type of service. It kind of goes without saying that unless you're really, really unlucky and you pick a really terrible company, that there's almost just an acceptance already that the standard is going to be good enough for what they need. So what is the thing that then differentiates you so that they choose you over all those others? And that thing about you mentioned there about your why, so your beliefs, your working methods and processes that are individual to you, your values, your stories, like those are all the things that you can get across in a podcast interview as a guest without having to spend any money on setting up your own show, just doing a little bit of legwork with the strategy. That's all of the stuff that's going to help people think, that's my kind of person that I'm listening to, that I am on that show, and that's the person that we should reach out and contact.
Yeah, but exactly that. You know, like I'll just add one quick thing. I noticed something. I mean, that was like a while ago, but I always wondered, you know, when you follow those big launches, and then remember the time the 3-video series. And you were like, oh my gosh, when do they get to the point they keep talking about themselves and where they come from and why they do that? It's like, I just want the thing, right? But the big difference is that I already knew the person. So to me, that was like, okay, he's going to show me his family, how he adopted his kids and stuff like that. It's like, I know that already. But to somebody that is completely new, he built a connection with the person, even about talking about his own expertise, right? And I understood, now I understand that a lot better of what he was doing. He was building rapport, right? It was really building that trust and that connection so that people were like, that sounds like a good guy. I share these values, let me continue and hear him about what maybe he can help me with.
That's such a good example. When you're thinking about what things to share, and we've discussed and shared all sorts of examples of the types of things that people could talk about, I would be thinking about what is, like, reverse engineer it from the next step that we want people to take. And you already mentioned, Natalie, that we're not trying to sell in a podcast interview. We are, it's an opportunity for us to do something that's aligned with our goals, whether that's raising visibility, building trust, and all of those things. But what is the thing that the audience needs to think, to feel, to believe in order to, after they listen to you, to take whatever the next step is? So what is the thing that we need them to believe to take that next step after listening to the conversation on that podcast interview? That was my thought. How can we get more value out of these podcast guest opportunities?
Yes.
How can we do that? Because, it is a great opportunity, but often what I've seen happen is that, and I've done this myself, I've been guilty of this, that be invited to be a guest on a podcast interview, and then I'll go and do the recording, and then that's kind of it. And then I don't really do much else afterwards. I'm then relying on the host of that show to promote the episode, to get it out there.
Mm-hmm.
How can we squeeze more juice out of this opportunity?
Yeah, I love what you shared, because that's the piece that makes the strategy work if you don't do that piece. So we talked about the before, right? Before the episode, before the recording, right? We meet with the host, all that stuff, select the right podcast to be guest on. There is the during, when you show up, we kind of talked about that. And there is the after. And the beauty is that with the after, I mean, the publishing is just the beginning. When you think about it, the publishing is just the beginning. Before that, nobody knows anything about what you guys just did, right? So that third phase, the after, is where you have control over what happens next. So yes, the host is going to share, but the host is going to share to their network. So you're going to get that visibility. But then it's for you to have a very clear call to action that we already mentioned at the beginning, right? So for me, that's going to be this tool that you can get at podcastleadflow.com/Jon. And that's going to be a tool to help you get a next step from our conversation today. Okay? And that call to action in that episode is something that you want to repurpose once it's published. So the host is going to share it on his end. That's great. But for you, now you've created an asset, right? That you can use like a lead magnet, like a lead generation, system that you can share social media with your networks, that you can share with your list as well, which is something people sometimes don't think about, but as a nurturing asset for people that are already on your list, in your network, but they haven't taken the step to work with you. It's an extra piece of value that you can share with them, right? That can get people sometimes to book the call or do that next step, right? So it's what you do after. The strategy really starts, I would say, when you're going to repurpose it, right? What you're going to do with it. So what some people do is, like, when we do a recording like that, they will take some snippets. There are hosts even that send you 4 or 5 short videos for you to share and things like that. So that's part of the strategy. The strategy of the after is really the one where you're going to get, more of an ongoing value. The publishing, the host is going to do, that's going to be like for 1 week, right? And then the host is on to the next episode, right? But for you, now you have this asset, this powerful asset that you can keep reusing.
Yeah, it is, when you think about it, it's such a great opportunity, isn't it? I mean, I know I mentioned I get a lot of pitches already, but I'm surprised that I don't get more. I just think that there's a lot of people that are not aware what a good opportunity podcast guesting is. And essentially what you're getting is you get a really high value, evergreen piece of content that you can embed it in your website. You can be sharing it. You can share it more than once. It's not kind of a once and done thing because that's a classic thing. And again, I'm definitely guilty of this as a content creator, that we create this content and then we spend nowhere near enough time promoting it. And when you have a bank of valuable evergreen content, which absolutely you could build up a really valuable bank of content for your business that was basically a playlist of podcast guest appearances, and you could keep sharing that again and again and again.
Yeah, absolutely. And you should, because when you have a piece of content that speaks directly to the person you're trying to connect with, why not reshare it? People might think that people see everything that we post, and they absolutely don't, right? So repurposing and sharing again and again and again, actually, people that create lots of content, they would track what engages and what doesn't. What doesn't get scratched, but what engages, they're like, "Oh, let's put it back in the bag where we can, repurpose it." So every time you're a guest on an episode and it speaks directly to your audience, that's an asset you've created. Just like when you create a lead magnet, that's something that it's just the beginning. It's repurposing, and like you said, having it on a platform that you have control over. That means where people can see your form and things like that, and treat it as a lead magnet. Don't just put the link in the middle of your show notes where they can click on 10 different other things, because it won't convert, right? So you can have your show notes. It's great for SEO and all that stuff, but you also need to have it on a page and really treat that as a lead magnet, where the only thing they can do is that next step. That's really how you can, increase those conversions.
That's such a good idea. Natalie, what would be the main thing that you would like people to take away from our conversation?
I think that a lot of people that are not podcasting are not doing so because they are not sure of what it can bring to the business. When you think about it, all people talk about is downloads. Downloads is not equal clients. Downloads is not equal money, right? Unless you're looking for sponsors, downloads don't matter if it's not the right person that's listening, right? So I think it's an amazing medium because it has the voice, and now very often we have the video to accelerate the connection, right? For get people to know us as humans, especially with AI being, everywhere. Here, it's real human. It's us. It's not our avatar, right? So it's an amazing opportunity if you are someone who likes to talk to people and connect with people, with guests, and share your story, share how you work with people, share why you love what you're doing, share the mistakes that you've made. People want to see that sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we failed more than once, right? And we are okay to share that. So I think that's my message, is that it's probably the quickest way to connect with someone if you have a strategy. If you don't have a strategy and you just rely on the host to find you, to promote you, then you're really missing out on a big piece of what podcasting is about.
Is there anything else you wanted to add that we haven't already covered?
I think that if you've never tried podcasting, you need to try it at least once, because you never know what's going to happen. I know starting your own podcast can feel daunting, but I can tell you a lot of people that think it's a lot of work are also the people that are not seeing what it does to the business. So they're spending time and money, and they have a business that's kind of running, and they don't know exactly what the podcast does to the business, so they keep doing it. The minute you start to get the metrics that say, oh my gosh, when I do this, I get this, that's a motivator, right? So you should be excited about being a guest or having a podcast. It should not feel like a weight.
That's a great thought. I think podcast guesting as well, it's a nice gateway to podcasting generally, that it gives people an opportunity to try or taste podcasting, being on a podcast without the commitment of launching your own show. Yeah. So for anyone who's curious about podcasting, I think podcast guesting can be a really great place to start.
Absolutely. I remember years ago, that was pre-COVID, I had a conversation with Jon Doremieux.
Oh, wow.
The podcasting.
Yeah.
Right? I was in London. And he was asking me, do you have a podcast? And no, I don't have a podcast. He's like, why? I said, it was about memberships, our membership offers. And I was like, I'm afraid to run out of things to say. And you say, why don't you do a season? Can you commit to doing a season? Set number of episodes. That's it. I said, yes, that I can do. And I did. I got 100 episodes. And actually, then I added more, 147 I did.
Wow.
That's what got me started. It kind of gave me permission to say, you don't have to do this forever. It can be seasons. So that's one more thing. If you're worried, am I going to run out of things to say? Well, you can do seasons, X number of episodes, and see how that goes.
I would encourage anybody to give it a try for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've thoroughly enjoyed my podcasting experience so far over the last couple of years. So I definitely would recommend that people try it. Yeah. everybody should try it at least once, as you say.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in guesting, it's like, it's something you have to do once. In you might just discover that this is something that, it helps you share things that you might not share, in writing. We all have our different ways of communicating, right? So yeah, I think it's definitely a strategy that at least guest posting, guest appearing, is it's a lot easier, right, to test than a podcast, than creating your own podcast. So definitely needs to be something you test.
Right. So that's it, everyone. You've heard it from us. You need to go and give it a try.
Yes.
If people would like to connect with you, where is the best place to connect with you online?
Yeah, sure. So they can go to podcastleadflow.com/Jon, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we're going to have that tool that is going to give you some advice or some tips, on what could be your next step, right? So it's going to ask you a couple of questions. It's powered by AI. It's Podcast Lead Flow. And it's going to guide you there. So that's how we're going to be able to connect.